Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the time. I appreciate you being down here with me. I think about just a couple of years that you and I have served in this Congress, and I think back. I hope Schoolhouse Rock was on TV when you were coming along. The first thing I did when the internet came out, and yes, I was old enough to remember when the internet came out, is I looked up the Schoolhouse Rock video, and I looked up the "I'm Just a Bill" sitting here on Capitol Hill, because it tells the tale, and we learned that before we learned all of our times tables. We learned how a bill becomes a law. We learned about what this great experiment in self-governance is that is the United States of America. And it makes me sad that it comes on a little less on Saturday mornings than it used to. And now parents are down on watching as much TV on Saturday mornings. I hope Schoolhouse Rock is still required viewing in every family in America, because the whole process of how a bill becomes a law, critically important to who we are as a people. As a people, I know what happens to you, Mr. Speaker, like it happens to me. I go back home and I'm the congressman, right? I'm the congressman. I'm holding a town hall meeting. I'm standing up in front of the room. Maybe I'm up on a stage. I've got a big microphone, and there are all these folks sitting out there in the audience, and it dawns on me that I'm the servant and all the bosses are sitting out there, right? That's what's so wonderful about what goes on here. You and I have the great privilege of representing a small slice of America. And in my case, it's the 7th District of Georgia. But the bosses live at home. And if we don't do this the way Schoolhouse Rock laid it out, if we don't go through that process each and every time for how a bill, the loser are each one of those individuals who show up at my town hall meetings who are actually the bosses of this country. The loser is the citizen in America who should be sitting on the board of directors, but who gets shut out of the decision-making process if we don't follow that simple cartoon that we all became fond of growing up. Mr. Speaker, you know better than I do. There was a Supreme Court decision that came out last week. It was called the Noel Canning decision. And that Supreme Court, you know, we talk about it all the time, Mr. Speaker. I wish I had a microphone that went out to the folks back in their offices who are watching this on TV. We could do a quick telephone poll of who folks think the liberal justices are, and who folks think the conservative justices are, and who folks think the middle is. But that court is divided. Whew. Oh, Mr. Speaker, you know, there are some hardcore conservatives sitting on the Supreme Court today, and there are some hardcore liberals sitting on that very same bench. 9 of these folks sitting up there on the bench, and I read the decisions when they come out, Mr. Speaker, and it's 5-4 this, 6-3 that. It's these starkly divided opinions about what the direction of America ought to be, and I get that. Right? We're a sharply divided country. We see that in presidential elections. We see that in congressional elections. But this decision that came out last week, Mr. Speaker, this Noel Canning decision, was decided 9-0 by the Supreme Court. 9-0. It did not matter how hardcore conservative the justice was. It did not matter how hardcore liberal the justice was. Every single justice agreed. And what they agreed on, and it gives me no pleasure to talk about it, what they agreed on is that the President of the United States exceeded the authority granted to him by this United States Constitution, and that the United States Congress did absolutely nothing to rein that in. And so the Supreme Court, 2 years later, had to make the decision that it was wrong. Now, I get the balance of powers, Mr. Speaker. I get it. I get that the Congress is here as Article 1, and we make decisions, and then our bills have to be signed by the President there in Article 2. I get it that if we pass the wrong kind of legislation, it's unconstitutional. The courts in Article 3 get to make that decision. But dadgummit, we have a responsibility as the 435 members who serve in this chamber, who are not the bosses of this country, but who are the servants of the true bosses of this country back home. We have a responsibility to maintain the authority on Capitol Hill that the Constitution provides. Last week, the court said unanimously, 9-0, that the president can't just decide what the law is and what the law isn't, that the law exists independent of the president, and his job is to follow those laws. Now, that's pretty clear here. You get into Article 2. In fact, we all take that oath when we get elected. We swear to uphold and defend the Constitution. The executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. The legislative power vested here. And so the Supreme Court said unanimously that the President had overstepped his bounds, that what he did was unconstitutional. I have a quote that they used, and it's important to me, Mr. Speaker, as I suspect you hear the same thing from your constituents back home. Folks say, why can't you get something done? Why can't you get something done in Washington? What are you guys arguing about? Why don't you get something done? Aren't there some things out there that you can do to make a difference in people's lives? I'm proud to say that you and I have collaborated on a number of those things. But folks feel the friction in this town. The friction of people who believe different things about what the future of this country ought to look like. And here's what the Supreme Court said, and I love it in its simplicity, Mr. Speaker. Supreme Court said last week, regardless, the Recess Appointments Clause, this is the clause that was being debated, this is the exceeding of his constitutional authority that the President embarked upon, regardless, the Recess Appointments Clause is not designed to overcome serious institutional friction. It is not designed to overcome serious institutional friction. It simply provides a subsidiary method for appointing officials when the Senate is away in a recess. Here, as in other contexts, friction between the branches is an inevitable consequence of institutional structure. The friction that you hear about back home, Mr. Speaker, the frustration that our constituents express about why folks can't get something done, why can't you agree, why is there a big argument going on, that friction, the Supreme Court says, is an inevitable consequence of our constitutional structure. And the concern then, Mr. Speaker, is in the name of avoiding that friction, some folks want to throw out parts of this Constitution. And my question, not just for members in this body, Mr. Speaker, but for every single constituent who votes in our national elections, what is more important? Is it more important to get something done? Is it the ends that are the most important? Or is it the means? And the means that were provided to us in 1787, that great summer in Philadelphia, where the best minds of our land came together and laid out a structure that has successfully protected the power of the people for over 200 years. Is it the ends or is it the means? And I tell you, and I don't attribute any bad motives to the President, Mr. Speaker. I don't attribute bad motives to the President. But I will tell you that in making the recess appointments that led to this unanimous decision that what the President did was unconstitutional, the President prioritized the ends. He knew who he wanted in these job positions. He knew the Senate would never approve these people for these job positions. And so he said, who cares what the Senate thinks? I'm going to put them in anyway. And the Supreme Court said, no, you're not. No, you're not. Now, the great shame for us, Mr. Speaker, is that it should have been the Congress that said that. Should have been the Congress that said that. Most specifically, it should have been the Senate right across this chamber that said that, Mr. Speaker. It should have been the Senate that stood up for the power that is not their power, but is the power of the American people to engage in this great balance that is our form of government, this great balance that has inevitable friction. We've got to decide for ourselves, Mr. Speaker, in this chamber and across the country, are we Republicans and Democrats, or are we Americans? Are we Green Party folks and independent folks, or are we Americans? Is this about which party wins and which party loses, or is this about America? And America is not a place on a map, Mr. Speaker. You know this better than most. America is not a place on a map. America is an idea. America is a set of values. There's so much more that unites us in this country than that divides us. And my challenge to my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, is that we rise to the occasion to protect and defend this document, no matter how small, no matter how simple, no matter how much it gets in the way of getting something done. This U.S. Constitution is designed to protect those freedoms, to protect those common goals, to protect that which makes us who we are as Americans. I'm not trying to figure out who to blame, Mr. Speaker. I'm trying to figure out how to solve it. And when the Supreme Court, again, if you've watched the Supreme Court, these folks, they can't agree on what time to meet, Mr. Speaker. They disagree about so much. 5-4 decision after 5-4 decision, this divided court, it's almost a term, Mr. Speaker. It's not the court, it's the divided court. That's the way it always shows up in the newspaper, the divided court. 9-0 said this Congress and the American people had abdicated their responsibility to rein in this executive branch and ensure that the law was followed. And here's the thing, Mr. Speaker, you know what I'm talking about. I signed up to be on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. The Oversight and Government Reform Committee is that committee that is responsible for going in and making sure the laws are followed and faithfully executed. And I joined that committee, Mr. Speaker, and you may think it foolish, but I joined that committee because I thought Mitt Romney was going to be the next president of the United States. And for too long, I have seen Republicans in Congress protect Republican presidents and Democrats in Congress protect Democratic presidents. And I haven't seen enough folks protecting the Constitution, protecting Article 1, protecting the power that the Constitution invests in each and every one of our constituents back home. And so I said, I'm going to sign up for this Oversight Committee because I want to be the hardcore Republican who rides herd over the Romney administration because you don't get a free pass because we're from the same party. You don't get a free pass because the Constitution doesn't give you a free pass. You don't get a free pass because my obligation is not to you as a fellow Republican. My obligation is to my constituents and to my country as an American. I wanted to bring back that idea that we as a Congress, not we as Republicans and Democrats in Congress, but we as a Congress, not we as the House, but we as the House and the Senate, we as the Congress, have a common goal and a common responsibility when it comes to the future of this country. Now, sitting over there on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, folks just think I'm a political hack. I try to give advice and counsel to the administration about what they're doing wrong. Folks say, he's just a Republican. That's why he doesn't like what's going on in the administration. Nonsense. 9-0, the entire United States Supreme Court said what's going on in the administration is wrong. Not wrong as in a mistake, but wrong as in the Constitution prohibits it. Wrong as in it is not allowed by that most powerful law that governs this land, the United States Constitution. And everybody in this town knew it the day that the president took that action. And yet, too many in this town were silent. We've got to do better, Mr. Speaker. We've got to do better. There is still more that unites us than divides us. Love of this Constitution that protects our freedoms is one of those things. So where can we start, Mr. Speaker? Where can we start? I have one recommendation, and it's a small one. And I've had the experience in my 3.5 years in Congress, Mr. Speaker. You may have had the same experience that if you can begin to agree on the little things, then the bigger things get a little bit easier to agree upon, right? You sort out those things that you have agreement on first. You lock those in as part of the final deal, and then you go out and you tackle the bigger things. So you start small and you build. It's true. It's true of exercise. It's true of almost anything. Start small and build. I'm thinking about the Consumer Financial Protection Board, Mr. Speaker. Now, you may think, Rob, Consumer Financial Protection Board, for Pete's sakes, that's just some little bitty agency over there under the Federal Reserve. Well, it's not. It's not. It's a big agency. It's a growing agency. But the most important part is it's what I said finally in that sentence, and that is that it is under the Federal Reserve. This is what happened. This is what happened. The year was 2010, and this body, led by the Financial Services Committee chairman at that time, Barney Frank from Massachusetts, passed what has come to be known as the Dodd-Frank Act, named after Chairman Frank on this side and Chairman Dodd over on the Senate side. The Dodd-Frank bill, and it went after Wall Street. Right? It went after Wall Street. This is in the aftermath of bank failures. This is in the environment that folks were concerned about what the economic future of America would be, much like they are still today. And this purported to solve so many of these challenges through more regulation. Now, we can argue about whether or not that was a good plan or a bad plan. I think it was a bad plan. I think it's costing us economic growth, not helping us with economic growth. But that's not my point here today. My point here today is that as a body, as a U.S. House of Representatives, when we passed that Dodd-Frank bill, which went over to the Senate and was passed, and which went to the President's desk and was signed, and which is now the law of the land, we created an agency called the Consumer Financial Protection Board, and we specifically and exclusively decided that this agency would not be accountable to the Congress in any way, shape, or form. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about that, Mr. Speaker. Here we are. We have been charged individually and collectively with protecting the United States Constitution, which divvies up power in this country. And what's so unique about this country is that the power does not come from government and is given to the people. The power comes from the people and is lent to government for a short period of time. The power belongs to the people. It is lent to government for a short period of time. Yet in our collective wisdom, and I certainly use that term loosely, we decided a brand new federal agency capable of spending hundreds of millions of dollars per year, capable of implementing hundreds of billions of dollars in regulations on America's small businesses, that we would create this agency out of the air. It had never before existed. We would create this brand new agency and we would place it somewhere beyond the oversight of this body. That we would bestow it with powers to crush businesses, to enable businesses. Give it these powers and place it somewhere beyond the control of this institution. It is unique, Mr. Speaker, as you know, in that its funding stream comes directly from the Federal Reserve. That would be the guys who print the money. Turns out when you can print the money and lend the money, you end up making a lot of money. So your very accountability over that money is almost non-existent. There's a renovation going on at the CFPB right now. Renovation. This is an agency that's been around 3 years. We've got a renovation going on. The most recent Inspector General's report, Mr. Speaker, tells us they're spending $215 million to renovate their building. $215 million, almost $250 million just to renovate a building. Now, when I try to evaluate a building space, I try to do it on a square foot basis, right? What's it costing per square foot to renovate, right? Because you do have to renovate, right? That's a fair business decision. According to the Financial Services Committee Oversight and Investigations Committee, this amounts to a $590 per square foot renovation cost. $590 per square foot. Well, if you're in the real estate business, your jaw has already dropped. But if you're not in the real estate business, let me give you that comparatively. I don't know if you've ever been to Trump World Tower in New York, Mr. Speaker. $334 per square foot is its cost. Most expensive city in the country. $334 per square foot compared to $590 with what the CFPB is doing. I don't know if you've ever been out to Las Vegas, Mr. Speaker, but you've probably seen Ocean's 11 a time or two. The big Bellagio Hotel and Casino, all those big fountains out front. It's the backdrop of so many movies that Hollywood puts out these days. It's really kind of the definition of decadence in that part of the world. $330 per square foot versus 590 at the CFPB. Now, why do I bring that up? Maybe 590 is the right answer. Maybe it is, Mr. Speaker. Maybe whatever's going on over at the CFPB is so important that it has to cost twice as much to build their offices as any of the most luxurious office space or hotel space in the country. Maybe that's true. But I can't tell because I'm not allowed as a representative here in this body to do oversight over that institution. Why? Because its funding comes directly from the Federal Reserve, not from this Congress. How does all this come together, Mr. Speaker? Well, the answer is still in this little old book. Still in these little pages from the summer of 1787. There's a fabulous painting right outside these chamber doors, Mr. Speaker, of that summer in 1787. George Washington is presiding. Ben Franklin is seated there. All the Constitutional Convention delegates are there as they craft this document. And what they decided was we were going to have an executive to execute the laws. Right? You can't execute the laws by committee. It was going to be too complicated. You need an executive to execute the laws. But an all-powerful executive is what those constitutional delegates had been fleeing in England. That's what the revolution was all about. So they were suspicious of an all-powerful executive. And so they created the Congress first, Article 1, and said the power of the purse, spending of the money will reside here. Because if you cut off the money to that executive that has run amok, he won't be able to run amok any longer. That was the theory. That was the plan. And yet this body is creating institutions, and by this body I mean this body before you and I arrived here, Mr. Speaker. Before you and I arrived here, not on our watch, but just 4 short years ago, began to create government that were beyond the reach of our oversight, beyond our ability to defund, beyond our ability to control. It may be the best agency on the planet, but it shouldn't be beyond the control of the people. Mr. Speaker, I'll end where I began. Are we Republicans and Democrats first, or are we Americans first? Are we Northerners and Southerners? Are we Independents and Green Party? Are we Move On and Tea Party? Who are we first? And the answer for me has always been, I'm a citizen first. I'm an American first. This great country that I have inherited, I didn't build it. I didn't sign my name to the Declaration of Independence pledging my life and my fortune to success. Oh, can you imagine? Can you imagine what it took in a time of great uncertainty when the die had not been cast for freedom to stand up and say, my name is Rob Woodall and I pledge my life and my fortune that freedom will come to this land. Oh, Mr. Speaker, that's what I have inherited. That's what you have inherited. That is what every single child born on these sacred shores inherits. What every immigrant who travels from far and takes that oath, what they inherit. And it is our responsibility to preserve it. When we concern ourselves with the ends and believe the ends justify the means, we will trample this Constitution at every occasion. At every occasion. And you need look no further than the Supreme Court decision last week, Mr. Speaker, where unanimously, these men and women entrusted with upholding this Constitution said friction between the branches is an inevitable consequence of our constitutional structure. I dare say an intentional consequence of our constitutional structure. I know there's a lot of pressure on folks, Mr. Speaker, from their constituents back home to get something done. But implicit in that is to get something done the right way. to get something done the right way. There are serious men and women on both sides of this chamber, Mr. Speaker. There are serious men and women on both sides of this Capitol. There are serious men and women working in the administration who all love this country and want it to be better tomorrow than it was yesterday. We cannot allow our zeal for results to trample the document that has enabled the results that we have had so far. And so I challenge my colleagues, Mr. Speaker, whether you're the most conservative Republican or the most liberal Democrat or anywhere in between, Mr. Speaker, I challenge each and every one of us to decide that if we have a bad process, we are going to end up with a bad product. But that our Constitution, no matter how cumbersome, our Constitution, no matter how deliberate, our Constitution provides that framework where whether we win or lose on a particular policy, our principles of freedom and opportunity will forever be preserved. I want to get good policy out of this chamber too, Mr. Speaker. I want to get good policy out of this town. I want to make a difference in the lives of people back home, but not at the expense of the birthright that I have inherited, which is this great country and the experiment in self-government. I believe we are worthy of that birthright. I believe we can rise to that occasion. But it's not going to happen by accident, Mr. Speaker, and it's not going to happen just inside the four walls of this building. It's got to happen in the hearts and the minds of every single family in this country who are the true leaders of this nation. And I hope those will be their instructions to us each and every day. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.